listening to On Israel in Al Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Details of last month's meeting between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett are coming out bit by bit. For example, Biden apparently made it very clear to Bennett that he plans to keep his campaign promise and reopen the American consulate in East Jerusalem, even though Israel's political right hates the idea. But with all due respect to the consulate reopening and its repercussions, of greater importance is what the two men agreed on more strategic issues that Israel regards as truly existential. Chief among them, the return to the nuclear deal with Iran and the alternatives in case these talks don't pan out. The International Atomic Energy Agency issued a periodic report last week which said Iran continues to expand its stocks of enriched uranium and is nearing the amount of fissile material it needs for its first bomb. We will talk about this and other matters with one of the people most familiar with Washington-Jerusalem relations for the simple reason that he served as Israel's ambassador to the US for 4 years under somewhat similar circumstances. Dr. Michael Oren was Benjamin Netanyahu's first ambassador to Washington during the Obama administration, and he is well placed to offer Bennett's ambassador to the Biden administration some useful advice. As I said, the circumstances are similar: a right-wing Israeli government and a democratic US administration, with Iran's nuclear ambitions overshadowing their relationship. We will ask Dr. Oren, who is also a respected historian and former Knesset member, about the operational options Israel has to block Iran's nuclear program, what lessons Israel could and should learn from the Obama-Netanyahu relationship fiasco, whether Israel is edging closer to war with Iran, and what role Hezbollah will play in light of its balance of mutual deterrence with the IDF. Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren joins us right after this short break.
If you're listening to this podcast, you obviously care about the Middle East, and if you do, you should probably be reading Al Monitor. Al Monitor is a global newsroom headquartered in Washington, D.C., with a network of over 160 contributors around the world. Al Monitor offers first-class reporting and analysis from a range of perspectives and an approach that represents the highest journalistic standards, as well as an award-winning commitment to press freedom and independence. If you haven't done so already, visit us at almonitor.com, check out our articles, and sign up for our free newsletters. There's a lot to choose from, including the Week in Review, an essay that offers unusual insights and forecasts into the region based upon Al Monitor's outstanding reporting. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our Al Monitor podcast on your favorite podcast platform, On Israel with Ben Caspit, and On the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Now I'm happy to say hello to Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren. Hi, Michael. How are you doing? And thank you for joining us here in On Israel.
Good to be with you, Ben, as always.
Thanks. And I wanted to talk to you first about an essay. You recently wrote an opinion piece arguing that there was a reasonable chance of a military clash between Israel and Iran. And do you think the Iranians will try to time such a clash for the winter months in order to limit the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force? And can you share with us the thinking that led you to this assessment?
Well, I try to put myself in the minds of the Ayatollahs, Ben. And I'd have to ask myself, why not use this opportunity to break out and make a nuclear weapon? Now, keep in mind, the Iranian regime will not be satisfied with what's known as threshold capacity, the ability to break out quickly and make a nuclear weapon. I think they have to have the weapon itself. They need it for regime stability and survival. They saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. They saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi when they gave up their nuclear programs. They died. They saw what didn't happen to the North Koreans because they didn't give up their nuclear program. So it's survivability of the regime. But more importantly, I think for this regime is also its prestige. And they are, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they look at the Indians and they've got a bomb. They look at the Pakistanis, they've got a bomb. They look at Israel and they believe that Israel has a bomb. How is it possible that the Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't have a bomb? It's essential for their raison d'etre. So then they have to say to themselves, the Ayatollahs, okay, when can we get this bomb? We have now enriched enough uranium to near weapons grade that it would take a very short period of time to break out and make that weapon. They've seen the pictures from Kabul, from Afghanistan. They know that the United States is not going to intervene. They know that the world is not going to intervene. And they look at Israel's government, which is a very wide coalition, which will have a hard time responding to a war situation. And that plays in their favor as well. The United States may actually act to prevent Israel from responding. Hezbollah is strong. Hamas is strong. So they have Israel surrounded with missiles should Israel try to act. And they could use those winter months. Now, during those winter months, the Israeli Air Force faces challenges from inclement weather. And its ability to strike long distances is curtailed to a significant degree. So if you're going to break out and get a bomb, and they need the bomb, wouldn't January, February be the ideal time to do that and present the world with a fait accompli?
And this is a doomsday scenario that you're portraying here for us, and actually it's quite frightening. Before I will go on with you about the American side, what do you recommend the new government in Israel to do facing this threat?
Well, it's doomsday. Doomsday is relative here. Why? Because if it happens in 5 years, it'll be worse. In 5 years, Iran will have more missiles surrounding us. Its program will be further along. It'll be maybe underground. It'll be more difficult for Israel to respond. If it's going to happen, I almost prefer that it happens sooner rather than later. It's going to happen eventually. Of that, I'm absolutely certain. What the Israeli government should be doing is should be building its case. And I thought it was very good that Prime Minister Bennett went to Washington and put our relationship with the Biden administration on a new page. He said he wasn't going to attack the JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear agreement, publicly the way Benjamin Netanyahu did. And I think that's a good approach. But on the other hand, I would also say, how about making our case why Israel cannot coexist with an Iranian nuclear weapon? That Israel's ability to respond to terror will be greatly impaired if we have an Iranian nuclear weapon pressed to our head all the time. It'll become impossible. Defense Minister Benny Gantz just spoke, I think, today at a counterterrorism conference in Herzliya, and he talked about the need for the international community to approve snapback sanctions against Iran, to act in concert to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I think that's a very different approach to Benjamin Netanyahu's. And one of the criticisms of Netanyahu's policy was that it made the Iranian nuclear program an Israeli issue. And I think that this government is trying to internationalize it again, which is fine. But at the same time, we should be reminding the international community that Israel has the right and the historic, and I think Jewish duty to defend itself and to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and that we will take action to prevent that from happening should Iran try to break out. I think it's in the old Roman method of Carthage must be destroyed. We should be repeating that over and over again, as loudly as possible in every possible form. Benny Gantz did not say that today.
This is what you wrote in that piece that we're talking about, that we have to start and build, not start, but go on building the legitimacy of a possible Israeli military action. But I want to move now to the other side, the American side of the equation, and talk about President Biden, that seems to have modified somewhat his comments on Iran. He said he's still committed to preventing Iran from obtaining a bomb, but he didn't add "on my watch." I'm talking about the meeting with Prime Minister Bennett. And he considered that there are other options on the table except for diplomacy. Do you think this is a sufficient, clear statement for Iran to view it as a real military threat?
No, it's not. I think the Iranians were probably relatively happy with those statements. What he says is that Iran won't get a nuclear bomb on his watch. He has said that for many years. I remember he used to say that quite frequently as vice president, and it was President Obama's sort of mantra as well. But Iran could get many other things on their watch, including hundreds of thousands of rockets, and expanding its sphere of influence around the Middle East, transforming Syria and Iraq and Yemen into de facto Iranian forward bases against Israel, and achieving threshold capacity, the ability to make a bomb very, very quickly, which also would be an intolerable situation for the state of Israel. Most pointedly, President Biden didn't say that all options are on the table. He simply said if negotiations fail, we will consider other options. That's a retreat from a long-standing American policy of saying all options are on the table. The president, to give him his due, cannot say that today in the aftermath of Afghanistan. Americans do not want to hear that America is poised to get involved in another Middle Eastern war. And my major concern about the United States ban is the degree to which the United States will act to rein in Israel for fear that Israel will drag the United States into another Middle Eastern war. It's a real fear. We can say that Israel can defend itself by itself against the Iranian threat, but not everybody in Washington believes that entirely. So they remember Lebanon in 1982 and 1983. That's some of their memories. So they're afraid of that. And frankly, I can understand them. Given the state of American trauma over Iraq and Afghanistan, I can understand them. But it's very important that Israel makes its case also to the president again and again. I'm sure that Prime Minister Bennett did this, and that is that this agreement, the JCPOA, does not bind us in any way. We're not beholden to it in any way. We view it as a strategic and possibly existential danger, and we will take every and all measures necessary to defend ourselves against Iran and Iran aggression, Iranian nuclearization. Just a final point, and that is I would have hoped that Prime Minister Bennett, in return for his silence vis-a-vis the JCPOA, I would have hoped that he would also have asked President Biden what America could give us to help shore up our security. America has vast military capabilities, many of which we do not have. Israel does not have strategic bombers, for example. And there are also, and the United States could share some of those capabilities with us.
Ambassador Oren, do you think it's on the table, the possibility to get strategic bombers? Because people that are not familiar with this issue and said that maybe the Americans can supply Israel with the bombs, with the penetrating, very, very heavy bombs that
50,000 pounds.
Exactly, that under President Obama were manufactured in the United States. They don't understand that we need the B-52s to fly them. We don't have this capability. I think we even don't have an airport, a military airport in Israel that can this bomber can fly from. So is it really on the table, in your opinion?
It was on the table during my period as ambassador.
Oh.
And then as my period as deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office was on my table again. So it's an issue I know quite well. And who knows, maybe if Trump had been reelected, we could have gone somewhere with it. President Obama, during my term, turned it down twice, not for want of trying. And I hope I'm not making headline news here, but I thought it would be an important message to do, publicly, to show the Iranians that we mean business. Even allowing Israeli air crews to train on one of these bombers would have been a good message for Iran, but that was not to be. And I think I would hope that it was something that the Biden administration would seriously consider.
Very, very interesting what you just said. Do you think without these capabilities, is there any real Israeli military option vis-a-vis Iran after it was neglected in the last few years? There was no budget. Now I think the government just approved 7 billion shekels in order to restore the military option. What do you think about it?
I think that Israel has the right. I think Israel has the ability to defend itself against Iran. I can't go further than that, okay? But I do. Obviously, it's not the same ability that the United States has. And there's a part of me that wants to say to American decision makers, listen, you just suffered 20 years of humiliating defeats in Afghanistan and Iraq. You could erase all those defeats in one night of bombing over Iran. And by the way, these strategic bombers bombed from like 50,000 feet in the air. Iran has nothing that could touch that, nothing.
This
so
is exactly what I wanted to ask you, Ambassador
yes.
Oren, because I think we can appreciate the American trauma from spending the trillions of dollars and thousands of lives in Afghanistan and Iraq. No one can, from us here in Israel or elsewhere, can recommend the Americans to go on do it in some other places like Iran. But isn't there a way to convince the Americans that it's not a war we're talking about, that they have the capability to destroy the Iranian nuclear program without spending lives or a huge amount of money?
You know, I'll never forget sitting at a meeting with then Defense Minister Ehud Barak and American policymakers. And this is now 10 years ago. He was saying to them, listen, you, in one night, a couple of hours of bombing, you can erase all of your failures in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was 10 years ago. And I think it's far truer today. The Obama administration and after that, the Biden administration had a mantra, and it was kind of a false dichotomy. It's either diplomacy or war. And it put people in a very difficult position. I mean, nobody in the Middle East actually believed that President Obama was going to go to war against Iran. The only people who believed it were a significant part of the American population who were convinced by this mantra that if they didn't pursue diplomacy with Iran, that they were going to be dragged into another war. Clearly, the alternative to diplomacy was not war. It was tougher diplomacy and sanctions. But even if it came to military action, it's not war. Iran does not have an air force, man. Iran does not have formations of tanks. There's nothing for Iran to go war against. Iran could support terror against the United States, but it's doing that now anyway, really. And yes, and yes, a night of bombing would take out all of the nuclear facilities and maybe some other important facilities that the Iranians need, and would send an unequivocal message, which is not just, we're not saying Iran's not going to get a nuclear weapon on our watch. Iran is not going to have the means to make nuclear weapons ever.
Interesting. Let's talk about the meeting. You've been the ambassador in a very, very tough period of time during the 4 Obama years against, I think we can say against Benjamin Netanyahu. You know everything about it. And what do you think about the meeting? How would you describe Bennett's first meeting with Biden? Do you agree with those who think that the Prime Minister managed to create a sense of intimacy with Biden?
I think given the circumstances under which that meeting took place, it was a miracle that it happened at all. And I do think that there was a rapport established. I can't vouchsafe for the president's ability to concentrate at that moment. He was dealing with a national emergency of historic proportions, right? Very difficult. But given the fact that he did find the time, that they had that discussion, I think it was a worthwhile trip. My only reservations were I wanted the Prime Minister to make a stronger case for our need to defend ourselves. I would have liked the President to come out and say Israel has a right to defend itself. I thought he was going to do that. And behind the scenes, some type of understandings about sharing capabilities and also understandings about when Israel would have to act by itself to defend itself.
And what do you think, if we go into Middle East politics, another issue that you are very familiar with, what do you think about, what should Israel react to the reopening of the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem? It is not done yet. It was not done yet, but the president, as we heard, emphasized to the Prime Minister that he's not going to desert this plan. So the consulate stood there for decades, but it's not such a disaster. But what do you recommend Bennett to do in this issue?
I think Bennett should oppose it. I think Bennett should oppose it strenuously, robustly. I opposed it even before it was closed. I thought it was a unique situation in the world, sort of sui generis situation in the world. It was anti-Israel and I think even anti-Semitic, because that consulate, if you looked on its webpage, it didn't have a single word in Hebrew. No mention of any Jews in the city of Jerusalem. It was amazing. Never mind that Jerusalem was our capital. There were no Jews in the city, according to that website. And it represents a de facto redivision of the city of Jerusalem. And I think we should oppose it. that does not close the door to alternatives that can be creative. We are sending a very capable diplomat and negotiator, Mike Herzog, as ambassador to Washington. He has my highest respect. And I think that Mike has the ability to come forward with some creative solutions.
Do you have tips for him as a guy that have been there, done that, saw everything in the traumatic Obama-Netanyahu years? I think we're not going to another session of what you've suffered.
No, we won't. But in certain ways, Mike's job is going to be harder than my job.
Interesting.
I think that the political polarization in America is deeper today. The ability to gain bipartisan support for Israel and Israel-related issues is more difficult today. The Jewish community in the United States are more divided than ever today. And the ambassador's, maybe his principal role is to be the great unifier. And, I often had the sense a decade ago that I had one foot in two different horse carts going in different directions. Those horse carts are not horse carts anymore. They're race cars. And and he's going to have a very difficult time. He will. But again, I think he's a very capable person. If anybody can do it, he can.
I think about it, talking to you now in retrospect. What do you think about President Obama's attitude to Israel? There is a harsh debate in Israel between people that think that he was an Israel supporter, but he was not, a lefty. And but he invested a lot in Israel's national security, the arrow and everything. And the other side, especially the Bibi camp, that says anything but almost he was an anti-Semite.
No, he was not an anti-Semite. I think I got to know Barack Obama fairly well. I liked him. I respected him enormously. But we had policy differences and substantive policy differences. About specific issues such as the peace process, certainly about Iran. But more generally, I think that Obama was part of a generation that didn't remember the Six-Day War, unlike Joe Biden. Didn't grow up with Israel in his heart, as we like to say. Israel was a foreign country. He understood, and I heard him say this. It was so funny. The last day in job, I was in the White House, in the Oval Office with Bibi, and Obama said the most extraordinary thing, Ben. He says, if Israel ever went to war, the United States would be there, because that's what the American people expect. You hear that? Not what I would feel that I had to do. Not that I feel that incumbent. I feel morally.
It's not me. It's the people.
The people. And so he was a realist. He was a politician. But having said that, I think he sought to normalize the special relationship between the United States and Israel, to take it down a few rungs. He was deeply committed to international organizations like the UN that are hostile to the state of Israel, the Human Rights Commission, that those institutions. He was the most popular, most pro-Palestinian president ever. And he changed some fundamental principles in our relationship. One of them was no surprises. In previous administrations, Israel always got a copy of a speech that the president was going to make if that speech, touched on our interests. You may recall that in 2002, President Bush gave Ariel Sharon a draft of the roadmap to comment 2 weeks before. President Obama went to Cairo, gave the Cairo speech, an hour-and-a-half speech that changed many long-standing aspects of American policy. We had no warning of that at all. Nor would I receive any warning of any speech he made about the Middle East for the next 5 years. In one case, I was actually misled about the content of it. So very, very different. And yes, he gave us great support for Iron Dome and Arrow 3. I understood, though, that on one hand, he was going to give us money for our systems. On the other hand, he was going to condemn us in the Security Council and give a lot of what they call.
Didn't Prime Minister Netanyahu earn this condemnation, etc., when he, as a revenge, landed in Washington on I think it was March 2015 to have this famous speech to the Congress without coordinating it with the president?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong man that question, because I opposed the speech, and I think Netanyahu never forgave me for it, frankly. I mean, I agree with every word of the speech. I strongly disagreed with where he gave the speech. I knew it would actually cost us bipartisan support, and it has. People haven't forgotten that speech. But having said that, that speech followed 6 years of extreme animosity.
Yeah.
And I think, in many cases, gratuitous animosity toward the White House, toward Netanyahu, toward the Israeli government. It was Jackson Deal, the famous columnist from the Wall Street Journal, who once wrote that Obama treats Netanyahu worse than a third world dictator. Bringing him through the back door of the White House and not taking a picture with him. It was like all humiliation. And it wasn't just one crisis. It was rolling crisis really from day one. And while I disagree with the speech, at that point, there was seriously no love lost.
So let's move back to these days, to President Biden. When I heard and saw what happened in Afghanistan right now and the harsh criticism that President suffered after it, even in his base and the polls, and etc., maybe I'm trying to challenge what you said before. Maybe this can work in favor of Israel or pro-Israel, because maybe now the administration will think twice before going on getting out from the Middle East. And would you recommend Bennett and Lapid now to try to organize, an alliance of states like Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, and come together to the president, talk to him about Iran?
I think it's a very well-conceived notion. It depends on where America is right now. I guess I'm a little older than you. I'm probably a little bit older than everybody at this point. But I remember very well the fall of Saigon in 1975. And a great humiliation after a horrible war of 10 years. And you know what the United States did in 1975? It immediately embarked on multiple ambitious diplomatic initiatives. It was the SALT II treaties. It was the Helsinki Accords. And here it was Sinai I and II, with Kissinger shuttling between Arab and Israeli capitals, that laid the basis for our peace with Egypt. Really great achievements. And it showed the world that America, wasn't going anywhere. America could still, punch well above its weight. I don't know where America is right now after Afghanistan. I don't know whether America is so divided at this point and so, torn up inside over issues like critical race theory and wokeism, whether it's in a position to begin to exert its influence diplomatically around the world. I mean, one of the responses to Afghanistan I would have welcomed would be for President Biden to get up there and say, okay, now I'm going to focus on expanding the Abraham Accords, to bringing Saudi Arabia and Kuwait into that alliance. But instead, the president wouldn't even use the term Abraham Accords. He didn't.
Okay, so now I think my final question, although it's very interesting to hear you, Ambassador Oren, I want to talk with you on another issue that you mentioned in your piece, Lebanon. You've argued that contrary to popular opinion, Lebanon's collapse is bringing Nasrallah closer to a clash with Israel rather than weakening Hezbollah and tying his hands. Please explain.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a veteran of not one but two Lebanon wars. And it was always my opinion, certainly after the second Lebanon war, that Israel made a mistake by not declaring war against Lebanon. Because from an Israeli perspective, the distinction between Hezbollah and the Lebanese state is an artificial distinction. They're one and the same. And if Hezbollah attacks Israel with hundreds of rockets, Israel should respond by bombing the Lebanese power stations, its ports, its airports, closing down the country, and actually declaring war in a formal diplomatic way. We can't do that today. We can't bomb Lebanon back to the Stone Age because Lebanon is in the Stone Age. Half the population is well beneath the poverty line, on the verge of starvation, and they're coming up to winter. Where's the fuel going to come from? From heat. People are going to freeze to death. Very cold in Lebanon, you may remember. I remember. And were Israel to strike Lebanon now, we would be condemned by the world instantly.
Even if we will suffer, I think the assessment now is 2,000 rockets a day from Hezbollah. Do you still think public opinion will be against us?
Yes, because we won't be striking Hezbollah, we'll be striking Lebanese civilians. And the world will say Lebanon has no ability to restrain Hezbollah. You're punishing the people who are already being punished. And I think that there must be people within Hezbollah who understand this, that the humanitarian disaster in Lebanon, by the way, which isn't impacting Hezbollah and its Shiite supporters, because they're supported by Iranian money, understand that this gives them a certain amount of shield, a certain amount of protection against Israeli retribution. So I've challenged the conventional wisdom, and the conventional wisdom, as you said, that Hezbollah is very much taken up with the situation in Lebanon. I don't think so. I think they're kind of immune to it, and I think they're willing to use Lebanon as a type of human shield.
So what can I tell you now, Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren? It was not highly optimistic, but it was very, very interesting. And I thank you very much for joining us here on Israel in Al Monitor. And we will take now a short break and come with some final thoughts right after this. Thank you. תודה רבה, Michael.
בבקשה, בכיף.
I'm Andrew Parasolidi, president of the award-winning media news site El Monitor, where we cover the Middle East with some of the best reporters and columnists anywhere. And I'm excited to announce our new podcast on the Middle East, where each week I will interview newsmakers from the U.S. and the region about the latest news and trends with additional commentary from our on-the-ground correspondents. Those of you who follow the region know that what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And to cite another great movie line, every time the U.S. tries to get out, the region pulls us back. Your time is valuable, so let me promise you this. You will learn something and you will never be bored, because each week we'll be talking with and listening to those leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in this critical and fascinating region. So please subscribe to On the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Thank you for staying with us. The conversation with the Ambassador, Dr. Michael Oren, was highly interesting in my opinion, but I was left with one maybe major headline that the Ambassador told us. He recommended that Prime Minister Bennett have to ask the administration for real steps or action to demonstrate its commitment to Israel's security and to Israel's right to defend itself. And the ambassador told us a story from his experience when he served here in Washington, that there was an initiative back in the Obama-Netanyahu era, when Netanyahu's Israel asked for the special bunker busters, those impressive and huge bombs, the GBU-57 that were manufactured by the Obama administration. And it included also selling Israel the B-2 bombers, because these are the only bombers that can carry these huge bombs. And the administration, the ambassador told me in a conversation later, said that we don't have enough of these bombers. So the fallback position was, maybe you will let us train Israeli staff or personnel on these bombers and then leak it to the press. And this can be a very clear message and signal to the Iranians that we are very serious here in Washington and in Tel Aviv. And maybe this idea can come back now. And Bennett can ask, or maybe he asked the American administration for such a step that will help him maybe to convince the Ayatollahs in Tehran that there is a real military option against the Iranian nuclear program. I hope you found it interesting, and we will be back here hopefully next week on Israel and Al Monitor. Thank you and bye-bye.